record here. Oh, there it is. Haha. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this. And can I start to share my screen then, Shaheen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Alrighty. Okay, so I want to share this thingy, right? Select the window. This is what I want to share. Oh, there. All right, hit the share. Okay. Okay, so can everyone see the first slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you look closely, I already misspelled one word in there, so that's a good start. All right, so how do let's see, I'm going to advance my slide here. So, no, wait, why did I do that? All right. Oh, it's going on here. Why can I not advance my slides? There we go. All right, so the US Electoral College, how it works, where it came from, why the US might want to hang on to it. All right. I designed and planned this talk. I've given this talk long before this past Tuesday's elections. Whatever was happening the last 48 hours is of no relevance to what I'm talking about. I would like to make a bet with someone that I could talk about the whole thing without mentioning names, Joe Biden or Donald Trump. I would surely lose that bet, but it's not out of the question that I might win. All right. Does anyone want to answer this question, like, why should we care? Okay, let's assume that this is moderately important enough that we should care about the US Electoral College. Obviously, this is going to be a long talk. It's a class, not a talk. It's a book, not a lecture. All right. Here's the outline. Number 2 is not even in this PowerPoint because in the interest of time. So that's already been bagged, although we can get into that in Q&A. Number 1, what it is and how it works. So I'm going to blitz through this really quickly, and then maybe number 3 is the most interesting part. So here we go. Fasten your seatbelts. How it works. The primary way that the U.S. elects the United States president. So therefore, it's important. Yes, probably. There are other ways to become the president of the United States, but those are very rare. Almost every single president, literally with basically one exception, has been elected through the Electoral College. No, there are several other exceptions. Even in the vice presidents are also elected through the Electoral College. So it's fairly rare to become president without the Electoral College, but those are even moderately interesting when we get into part 3, the justification. All right, every 4 years, number evenly divisible by 4, and a date set by law for Congress. So this year, the United States president will be elected on Monday, December 14th. We have not, what happened the other day was not the election of the president. It was the election of the electors. And they will be meeting on Monday, December 14th to elect the next president of the United States. They gather in their state capitals to vote separately for a president and a vice president. At least one of those two people has to not be from the state that they reside in. And that goes back to the original colonial days when people realized that no one knew anyone outside their state. So you had to vote for someone outside your own state. All right. The electors are real persons. They're not just sort of votes that are cast. They're real humans who actually vote on a given date in their state capital. They vote for separate ballots. The results are sent to the U.S. Congress where they are read aloud in a session of both houses combined on January 6th. You can challenge some electors. That is very rare, but January 6th, 2021, things might happen. Very important for the rest of this talk. The winner must get a majority of the votes cast, not the single largest number. You have to get an outright majority. That is crucial to the United States Electoral College. And as all of you know, majority is 1/2 plus 1. Plurality is just the single largest number. Majority is 1/2 plus 1. Extremely important. All right. That is so important that I put it on another slide. The winners must get a majority vote. Okay. The majority notion is the single most important. Okay. So, all right. Electors are selected by the states. Each state gets as many electors as it has senators and representatives in Congress. Every state has 2 senators and gets at least 1 representative. Representatives are based on population, which is why they do the census every 10 years. As such, larger states like California have larger electoral votes. However, since the small states have those automatic 2s, the proportion of the larger relative to the smaller is not equivalent to the populations thereof. The smaller states have a favored status in terms of their numbers, but that's very interesting down the line. All right. California has the most. Several states have 3. Washington, D.C. also gets electors as well. So if you notice the spelling there, that is the way that they that this word is spelled in the United States Constitution, choose, C-H-U-S-E, in a matter determined by the state legislature, if there is a legal battle that Trump has any grounds on, that clause in the US Constitution, in a matter determined by the state legislature, is the only thing he will have to hang his hat on. In Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court intervened, the Secretary of State who works for the governor intervened. That clause might be relevant in the next 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks by the state legislature. Plain language of the US Constitution. As a practical matter, since the mid-1800s, every state has given its entire slate of electors to this presidential candidate or party thereof who wins the most votes in that given state. Recently, some states, specifically Nebraska and Maine, have changed that, where the congressional districts, the winner of that congressional district gets that single electoral vote, and the winner of the state gets the 2 state votes that come from the US Senate. A political party is a recognized entity in American legal concepts of freedom of association. So what happens is that a state will authorize a given political party to select its electors. So if that political party's candidate wins that state, the state party selects the electors. Prior to Tuesday, the Republican State Party in Pennsylvania, the Democratic State Party in Pennsylvania, and the Libertarian State Party sent into the state legislature the candidates who they would wish to be their electors if their candidate won. Don't know who won Pennsylvania. Congress may by law determine the date of selection, which since 1845 is what we just happened on Tuesday, the Tuesday following the first Monday. Prior to that, there was no set national election date. If a state legislature wants to just come in and pick its electors, which they would be legally authorized to do, they would have had to have done that by Tuesday at the latest. The state of Pennsylvania, which has a Republican legislature, it is too late for them to go back and just by fiat send in the Republican slate to Congress. Too late to do that. Until 11:59 Tuesday, they could have done that. Would have been interesting. Michigan and Wisconsin were in the same position, but they didn't do it. All right, the real election day is in December. They actually vote in public. They announced their vote. The results are sent to Washington, D.C., opened at a joint session of Congress. The certification or challenges, which might happen, which has happened in the past in 1866. So won't go into that right now. All right. What if there's no majority? Here's where things get interesting. That is a good question. Once again, it has to be a majority, not just a single largest number of votes. So you see at the top, I crossed out the primary way, the secondary way, the primary secondary way. The first is that in the 3 top vote getters in the Electoral College get sent to the US House of Representatives, where each state votes as an entire delegation. So California's delegation in the US House gets the same as Rhode Island's, the same as Michigan's, the same as Vermont's. The winner must get a majority of the state delegations. Majority, here we go back to majority. The vice president then, since there's 2 candidates, president and vice president, the top 2 vote getters get sent to the Senate. Each senator gets to vote individually, and you need a majority to become the vice president. Notice that the United States vice president is actually technically a senator. So the US vice president might be voting for president, or excuse me, for vice president in the Senate following January 6th. And he might vote for himself, which would be very interesting. He probably would if given the chance. So that's the plan B. That has been used a few times, not very many, 1824, 1836, 1888. It almost happened in 2000. We're wondering whether it's going to happen again. Probably not, but got to be ready. What if that doesn't work? There's something, the 20th Amendment passed in 1933, where then Congress sort of picks a temporary president. If anyone's following the current scene, you can see why. So you hope these are technicalities and trivialities, but things, all right. There are procedures for these strange sets of circumstances. So it's the primary way. As I mentioned a few times, Under the old system, it was revised. The current Electoral College is not the exact one in the US Constitution. It was amended after the election of 1800 with the 12th Amendment. In 1824, Andrew Jackson was defeated even though he got the most votes. In 1836, there was no vice president who got an Electoral College majority, so the Senate had to pick the vice president. There was a strange situation in 1876, which created a bunch of laws after the election of 1876. It also ended the Reconstruction era in the South. Those laws are still on the books. They may actually come into play in 2020. The great paradox in the Electoral College is that a winning candidate may receive more popular votes on or about early November, day before yesterday, than the Electoral College winner. This has happened several times, twice in the last 20 years, maybe 3 times. 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, 2016. Almost happened quite a few other times, and I just listed 20th century onwards. There were quite a few other times when it actually came very close to happening. So I guess, I don't know if you want to say dodge a bullet or sort of, whatever, but it comes close. Obviously 2020 either will happen or will come very close to happening. All right. So that gets all the attention. That is the process of the Electoral College, and that is the end of section 1, which means we can either throw it open for Q&A, which might be interesting, or we could just plow on through to Kenneth Aram.
Yes, if people have questions, can you use the raise hand feature to let me know? And okay, we have 1 vote for both.
Question? Anyone? All right. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Plow on ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So this last slide here is actually sort of the key to the whole controversy about the Electoral College, and it's that top part where a winning candidate may receive more popular votes on or about early November, such as that is, than the Electoral College winner. Okay. So I'm going to argue that that is not the worst possible outcome that can happen. And even though that can happen, has happened recently, may literally be happening as we speak, that alternative is better than that way of doing things is actually better than the alternative. All right, and I have a couple of junk slides in here, so I go straight through to section 3 because I skipped the entire history of the thing. This is too long. This section is mathematical paradoxes in democratic election systems, of which there are quite a few. As you can see, there are 3 kinds of people in the world: those who can count and those who can't. I think that's a mathematical paradox. Technically, what I'm about to present are counterintuitive arithmetic phenomena but they're not math, they're not hotels with infinite numbers of rooms that are all full. Paul McCartney of the Beatles and solo career thought that no person should be considered musically literate until they have heard Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Coming from Paul McCartney, I think that's a pretty good reason to sit down sometime and listen to Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. I am not Paul McCartney in music by any stretch, or even in political science or social choice theory or whatever. But I'm going to argue that no person should be considered politically literate until they have a knowledge of these counterintuitive arithmetic phenomena in election systems. So, fasten your seatbelt a little bit. I am going to blitz through. Some of them are more important than the others. Some of them are just interesting. This first one is very interesting. So interesting that I didn't even present it. Elizabeth Anscombe had a little thing that she threw away. She never really pursued. I can discuss this in greater detail later. It actually has a relevance for the way the US amends its constitution, which we're not going to get into here. But Anscombe, one of the 20th century's most significant philosophers, wrote this little article that she never really pursued, but she came up with this crazy way that a majority of people can actually be losers more often than winners over a protracted series of elections. So you could sort of have a disaffected majority in a protracted series of elections, which I think happened with the Contract of America in 1994. It's another story. So the second paradox here is are well-known it's counterintuitive, but they're paradoxes of weighted voting. First of all, what is weighted voting? As an intuitive appeal, every person in this room, we have a business, and I have 14 shares. Shaheen, you have 28 shares. Georgie, you have 9 shares. Ellen, you have 6 shares. Lou, you have 22 shares. So we vote with our shares because the relative percentage of interest that we have in the stake is how much influence we should have. When you do the math, though, that doesn't work out. There are 2 very obvious examples there. Those are 2 companies where the first one, 2 people have 48%, the third person has 4%. As you can clearly see, that person who has 4% of the shares in this company has as much influence in the selection of a decision and the outcome of a decision as those 2 people with 48. Very obvious, counterintuitive, and unfair phenomenon. The next one is even more interesting because you will see that that last person who has 22% of the shares of a company has no ability whatsoever to influence the outcome of a decision. Any 2 of those 26s combined get you to a majority of 52, whereas 22 and 26 get you nowhere. No matter what he or she does, can't flip the outcome of an election, even though his or her share is just that much less than the 26%. A guy named John Banzhaf, sort of cribbing from a Lionel Penrose observation, noted this, and on Long Island in a water and sewer authority, the way the towns are distributed, sued and won. So this has legal standings, and he came up with a mathematical formulation involving combinations. Shapley and Shubik, one of whom won the Nobel Prize in economics, did the same thing, except they used permutations and not combinations. And this creates counterintuitive results where the percentage of share, and you can cash out the Banzhaf and the Shapley Shubik. You can get actual numbers, not just sort of vague concepts, verbal concepts. So counterintuitive, but important questions of fairness. You can have a dummy, a person who has no share in no ability to influence the outcome of an election, 22%. You can have a dictator, someone who has 51%. You can have veto power, someone who can shut down the whole operation just with 1 vote. If you're into corporate structure, you could argue that this ought to be more widely pursued in terms of the controlling interest in a publicly traded company. Another story. All right, so far we've talked about majorities quite a bit. Why is it important to have a majority? And here is my defense of the Electoral College. Remember, you need a majority to become United States president. What if you don't have a majority? And here's where things get problematic. The Simpsons live in Springfield, so they have a county executive election. They have several candidates running for county executive of Springfield. And I think here are 3 candidates. Okay. We have Vanderbilt. In the middle, we have Walsh. And in the far end, we have Uba. Okay. There's an important optics to this. I apologize, but we must remember that people often vote on optics. So I apologize in advance. There are stereotypes involved. That being said, in any sort of election, everyone who runs elections knows that the way things look, whether they are that way or not, are very important in the way people vote. So we want to know something more about these 3 candidates. Neil Vanderbilt served on the Town Council Regional Development Authority. He's a member of the Fifth Third Presbyterian Lutheran Methodist Church. He's a Freemason, a Shriner. He's married. He has 2.4 children. He is a real estate developer. Kevin Walsh owns his own insurance company. He has a BS in accounting from Loyola, a law degree from Michigan. He's a member of Our Lady of Perpetual Motion Catholic Church. He served on a planning commission, school board, married, 2.4 adult children. Very stereotypical white male middle class businessman. Ayomori Uba is a community activist with a bachelor's degree from Evergreen State College. I apologize for the stereotypes. Master's in Master's of Public Affairs from New School for Social Research. She stages sit-ins every year on Columbus Day. Now and then, of course, as Indigenous Peoples Day, she would marry her domestic partner, but marriage is far too patriarchal for her to participate in. And you see where this is going. Stereotypes, I apologize. But they're relevant for what happens next. They're also relevant in elections. Hate to say that, true fact of the world. So on election day, Uba comes in with 36% of the vote. Vanderbilt gets 34% of the vote, and Walsh gets 30% of the vote. No one gets a majority. Clearly, Uba has the most votes. Vanderbilt and Walsh aren't all that far behind. Who wins this election? Well, fairly obviously, since this is The Simpsons, duh, Uba. She has 36% of the vote. No one has more votes than she does. Makes sense, except two stereotypical white male, middle class, conservative Republicans add up to 64% of the vote. 64 versus 36. The consensus, the significant majority of the people in Springfield want a stereotypical white male, middle class businessman, conservative Republican to be the county executive. So maybe Uba isn't really a winner here. Maybe a conservative white male middle class Republican is a winner. Which one? So what do we do? So what do we do now? How about if we have a runoff to eliminate the last place person? So we'll have two elections. We'll have the first election. In the first election, if you remember, Walsh got the lowest, so he gets eliminated. And then we'll have a second election, and people can vote for Vanderbilt or Uba. So Vanderbilt is going to get most of Walsh's voters, so he's going to win with 64% of the vote. It seems plausible. A conservative white male middle-class businessman won the election as most people wanted, happened to be Vanderbilt. All right, fair enough. What's the problem with this one? Problem with this one is that Walsh and Vanderbilt are not the same person. From a distance, which hopefully you cannot read on there, they are indistinguishable. When you get closer, Walsh and Vanderbilt are slightly different. Yes, they're both conservative white male. They both got endorsements from Springfield Citizens for Life. They're both church-going, married, all that fun stuff. But Walsh supports brownfield development to take the rundown areas of town, whereas Vanderbilt wants tax breaks for greenfields, especially for the great booming industry of fracking. Walsh wants a light rail transit system to Sheffield County because there's a lot of interaction. No, Vanderbilt wants a new interstate exchange and eminent domain for the city park that they're going to have to take over to plow over to put that new interstate in. Walsh doesn't shop at Walmart as a matter of principle. He was a member of Amnesty International in college, and over drinks after the Masonic meeting one time, Neil Vanderbilt once was quoted as saying, caught on camera, "The public be damned." Cornelius Vanderbilt, railroad tycoon of the Gilded Age. All right, that was bad. That was his famous quote, "The public be damned." All right, so where does this leave us? What turns out is that even though probably Uba's progressive DSA voters do not like either Walsh or Vanderbilt, Walsh is significantly less bad by these metrics than Vanderbilt would be. So the problem with the runoff, if you remember, is that we eliminated Walsh, who even Uba's voters would like, and presumably Vanderbilt's voters would like as sort of a second choice. So in the runoff system, we have eliminated the most desirable candidate. In 1992 US presidential election, you could argue that the third place candidate, Ross Perot, was more desirable to the Bush voters and to the Clinton voters, but he got eliminated and wiped out. He could have arguably won that election in a ranking system, which is where we're going now. So instead of you rank the voters, so you go in there and you rank the voters as to how you want them. Well, Walsh's people would like Walsh first. Vanderbilt, pretty much the same, little different, some important issues, and clearly Uba is their third choice. Take all the Vanderbilt voters. They like Vanderbilt. Walsh, good second place, not bad. Uba's clearly third. And we get down to Uba's voters here, and if you remember, she clearly has all these fanatics who really want her to win, but Between Walsh and Vanderbilt, they would rather have Walsh. If you remember, he is incrementally less bad. He is somewhat attuned to some of their issues. So if you rank them, you clearly see that Walsh is going to win this election. That makes sense. A conservative, white male middle class businessman, less undesirable to a certain sort of left-wing progressive element. Great. What's the problem with this? Problem is that Vanderbilt's people will see that this is going to happen. So even though they're clear, they see that Walsh is going to win. So even though their clear second choice vote is Walsh, they know that if they all vote for Walsh second, he will win and Vanderbilt will lose. So Vanderbilt's voters will insincerely rank Walsh third, Uba second. And you have people voting insincerely, strategically, tactically, various formulations. And you have a situation where a large number of people aren't voting the way they really want to vote, and you create a winner that way. So that is a problem. So what is the alternative? What is the perfect system here, right? So this dude named Kenneth Arrow, graduate student in the late 1940s, was putzing around with these ideas, working on his PhD in economics at City University of New York. He was calculating all these, and every time he found a system, he found a flaw in it. So what's the frequency, Kenneth? What's the answer here? In the great 20th century tradition of proving that you cannot do or know something, and I start with Sigmund Freud saying he basically says you can't really know what you're really thinking, and Einstein said we can't really know what space and time are, they're relative, and Heisenberg and Schrodinger said these smallest levels, we don't know what's going on, can't even do arithmetic. So Arrow said, maybe there isn't a perfect system and maybe I can prove that. So he set about with a few relatively simple postulates. Unrestricted domain, Pareto, okay, non-dictatorship, which means there isn't one. I can explain all these, I don't want to do that now in the interest of time. But he concluded that no system with more than two choices, can you have a system that a priori can guarantee a fair result. We are all ordering a pizza. There are 8 toppings out there. There's extra cheese, pepperoni, broccoli, pineapple, mushrooms, black olives. We cannot guarantee that we can come up with a selection system that will satisfy all of our criteria. If we all vote for extra cheese, a posteriori after the vote, that's fair. But in advance, we cannot know that. We cannot come up with a system of this. This is called Arrow's impossibility theorem. It won him the Nobel Prize in 1972, the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Prize in economics. It threw everyone curveballs because everyone thought we could come up with these great systems, and we can't. He didn't really say that everything is flawed, but there's a way that you can't guarantee in advance you're going to come up with a fair result. So I've already gone over a few problems with a few of them, rankings and runoff. Mere plurality, which Uba got the first time, but it doesn't represent the essence or the general zeitgeist of the people of Springfield County and their county selection. There's a couple other things that were thrown out over the centuries. Marquis de Condorcet had a really good idea about if one thing beats out all the others in every sort of ranking system, that would win. However, that could create a rock, paper, scissors scenario. Rock, paper, scissors would really be rock, scissors, paper, right? Rock beats scissors. Scissors beat paper, but then paper beats rock. So you can have a crazy system where that comes about. The holy grail that a lot of people are arguing for now is something called ranked choice voting, where you rank all of your people. We already had a ranking system, but then you eliminate the bottom people, and then if my first place choice ended up at the bottom, the system takes my second place choice and then casts my vote for that. There are serious legal issues with that in terms of a one person, one vote thing. The state of Maine uses this. I'm surprised this hasn't been challenged. The greater sort of mathematical problem, this fails an important criterion called monotonicity. By that I mean, you can actually improve your candidate's chances by lowering his or her place on the pecking order. So instead of voting for my guy third, I vote for him fifth. That might help his chance of winning. Bizarre. Rare, but bizarre. My question as a practical matter would be, I could probably sit down with some people and rank the top 3 or 4 best players in hockey or basketball or something like that. Could I really rank the difference between 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21? Would I really care if I got down that far? So if we had a ranked choice voting system, would people be throwing things in at the bottom? Says, I don't care, 7th, 9th, who really cares? The question becomes, if you elect any candidate, much less the President of the United States, and you could show that if 35 people switched the 6th and 7th place rankings, that a different person would be elected. Is that better than the system that we have now? So that's my question. It's called monotonicity. Here we are, back to the US Electoral College. Remember, you need a majority. Everywhere you turn to become United States president, you need to have a majority. There is no possible way, with a very few exceptions, to become president of the United States or even vice president without a non-trivial majority. President, Electoral College, House of Representatives. Vice president, Electoral College, US Senate. And then in the case of a vacancy, the president can appoint a vice president who needs to be confirmed by a majority of the House and the Senate. There's some constitutional questions as to whether or not the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate can actually serve as president. I think if they ever got to that point, there'd be no question they'd swear that person in a heartbeat in public just to make sure things are going on. But to become Speaker of the House, you need to be a majority of the House. President pro tem of the Senate, majority of the Senate. Cabinet officials need majority senatorial confirmation. You cannot become president without getting the approval of a non-trivial majority of something significant. So my argument here is that the Electoral College not only requires that a person get a majority to become president, requires that a person make his or her campaign try to appeal to a majority or a significantly large, diverse section of the electorate. You cannot just run up the score. If there are 8 people running for president, you cannot become a regional candidate. In 1968, a third-party candidate, the governor of Alabama named George Wallace, did very well in the South. He got like 13% of the national vote. Outside of the South, he was at best a minor factor. What if we had 8 or 10 people running for president and a regional candidate or a fringe candidate got the single largest number of votes? My argument is that not only do you need a majority in the present system, you need to try to make a broad national appeal to get a majority, which I think is the advantage of the Electoral College system. A second defense, that is an awful lot. I hope I didn't lose anyone. I'm sure I did. That's why it's recorded. We can go back over this. But you need to have a majority. If you go back to the weighted voting paradoxes, how a bill becomes law, half of the House, half of the Senate, plus the president's signature. Or if the president doesn't sign and vetoes, you can have 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. When you do the math of that based on the weighted voting paradoxes, which have mathematical consequences, here's the result you get. Each House of the United States Congress has vastly more power than the United States president when it comes to making or breaking laws. Bad choice of words. My argument here is, as limited as that president's power is, do you really want to make that person even less credible if he or she gets to that tiny little thing in the center there, which is the White House, underneath that domineering Capitol? Do we really want a president who is not a majority in some important national broad sense? If we had that situation, the president obviously has broad discretionary powers with respect to laws, and especially with respect to the military. My question would be to prove his or her power as he or she is getting dominated by the House and the Senate in ways that we haven't seen yet, believe it or not. Would the president be more eager to undertake military action to prove that he or she is really the boss, or take executive action as if that doesn't happen enough to prove that he or she is really the boss? So by requiring that the American president demonstrate that he or she have non-trivial, broad national support somewhere along the line, I think that's an important factor. I will also add, and I don't have a slide for this, these weighted voting systems also cancel out the relative discrepancies in the Electoral College powers between the states. So when you do the math, and when you do the coin tosses, the 50-50 Gaussian distributions, which are different for small numbers than for large numbers, blah, 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 that requires some nerdy math. You can demonstrate that each person in every state of the United States has almost identical power to swing the outcome of the United States presidential election. It's a weird, it's unbelievably how remarkably that works out. But a voter in Wyoming has roughly the same chance of influencing the outcome of an election as a voter in California or Alabama or Minnesota or whatever. Unbelievable coincidence, but it works out that way. So there's no real favoring of the small states with the Electoral College. Wow. In recent years, in year 2000, we had George Bush win the Electoral College with 48% of the vote, where his primary opponent, Al Gore, actually got 49%. My argument that George Bush is a more legitimate president at 48% than Al Gore at 29%, because my argument is without the Electoral College, there were actually 4 major candidates who really wanted to become president. In the Democratic nomination, Al Gore beat a well-respected senator from New Jersey named Bill Bradley, who did not like Al Gore. He thought he was candy butt, entitled, whatever. So he, as a Democrat, clearly would have run in the fall. John McCain did not like George W. Bush. He thought the same thing of Bush that Bradley thought of Gore. McCain surely would have run in the fall 2000 election. The winner would have come out with a resounding 29% of the national popular vote, or something like that. My argument that George W. Bush was a better, more legitimate president, even at only 48%, than Gore would have been at 29%. Ditto, 2016. Trump got far fewer votes than Clinton. However, there clearly would have been a 4-person race. Bernie Sanders would have clearly run in the fall. Ted Cruz did not like Donald Trump and did not even endorse him, senator from Texas, did not even endorse him at the national convention. So we would have had, in this effect, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And Hillary Clinton might have won, but with a resounding 29% of the vote. Trump at 45 is more legitimate than Clinton at 29 by this reason. Something called the anonymity of crowds. I think most of you recognize the 2 people on the right. They could not walk into, well, Reagan, no longer with us. Neither one of them during their lives could have walked in, certainly presidency or post-presidency, could have walked into any restaurant in the United States without everyone recognizing who that person is. Those others are the Congresses they had to deal with, the anonymity of that big crowd. They have the luxury of being irresponsible. Most of those people could walk into a restaurant in any district outside of their own in the US, and some even in their own districts, and no one would know who those people are. Yet, if you remember, the Congress has an enormous amount of power relative to the president, certainly in terms of legislation. So we all see those 2 guys on the right. None of us see those huge crowds on the left, even though those people on the left, those 2 pictures on the left, are vastly more powerful in certain important respects than those 2 guys on the right. My argument is those 2 guys on the right deserve a sense of national support as they represent the nation as a whole. It is far better that they do that from a majority perspective than just a mere, I got 1 more vote than the other doofus. We can still call them doofuses, but at least they're majority doofuses. Is it the lesser of 2 evils or many evils? Is it the best of the worst? Is it the cream of the crop? Maybe. Might even be an affirmative good. Where are we? Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. We left Kansas a long time ago. We are in the real world. These things happen. The United States is not a monocultural, monogeographic, 1-crop country. It is wildly diverse. You need to appeal to become a national leader, to appeal to broad segments, which I think an Electoral College majority requirement forces you to do. Do we see any farther than those who came before us? I think it was Isaac Newton. If we see farther than those who came before us, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants. Thank you, Bridge Pittsburgh. Other local giants, in order from left to right across the screen of the order which I had direct affiliation with these 3 distinguished institutions, and also the order in which they came up with their present name. in the spirit of Yogi Berra, lining up alphabetically by height. Thank you so much to too many people at Duquesne University, University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon University, in addition to countless people from a personal nature who have contributed to this. I'm hoping we are seeing farther. I will end than we saw at the beginning. I will end with a concluding unsupported paradox that contradicts everything I say, paradoxically. Democracy is the worst form of government ever devised by the human race, except, of course, for all the other ones that have been devised, from the great American statesman, Winston Churchill. Thank you very much.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I have been rather enlightened. I mean, I thought I knew about the Electoral College, but this is really shifting my perspective.
Turn on your camera.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. That was great.
Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. I hope that it didn't. It was high warp speed. I went over with coarse grain. There's a lot of detail there, but I hope we got the cliff notes, the spark notes conclusions down, and you can understand why an argument can be made in favor of. Thank you very much. Glad you appreciate it.
Sorry, just to make sure, did you stop the recording?
Oh, thank you.
I would love to get a copy of that if possible. My Zoom crashed my computer, so I missed the very end. I have your slides here. I'm looking at them, but thanks. This is terrific.
Okay, so let me see. Okay, I want to stop